Do you think people are born LGBTQ+?
The Bible is wrong. Probably about 50% of sexual orientation is determined by our genetic inheritance.
People are getting it kind of, in a way, like forced down their throats every day.
I have a son who is transgender.
Oh my gosh, the LGBTQ community is under attack. No, we're not. Leave the kids out of it. There's no need for you to be around kids at all.
So today I'm out here and the question I'll be asking is, should LGBTQ topics be taught in school?
As a queer person, I see that history as something that needs to be taught to all people. I think it's important history just as much as anything else that's taught.
I don't see the value in teaching it. I think that they'll learn naturally about heterosexuality, homosexuality, everything like that as they age. Sexuality should just be kept out of schools.
I have a son who is transgender. I would certainly hope that my child, at whatever age, could be accepted.
I kind of grew up going to like a Christian school, and my family was very conservative. And so when I transitioned into public school and like I went to college, being around that all the time, I didn't realize there were so many people out there. If I would have been taught more, it wouldn't have been such a culture shock for me.
Kids are way too young to be exposed to personal agendas that people might have. I think that there's a lot of people who are attracted to teaching kids things because they understand how young kids are more open to ideas. They're much more easy to be persuaded.
You don't lead off with George Washington was the first president of the country, and oh, by the way, he was heterosexual. I don't think LGBTQ would be that much different. I would leave it up to the local community, whatever fits that community.
My name is Peter Tatchell. I'm the director of a small human rights organization, Peter Tatchell Foundation, and I've been campaigning on both LGBT+ and other human rights for over 56 years.
Should LGBTQ topics be taught in schools?
It's very important to challenge ignorance and prejudice among young straight kids who perhaps don't understand LGBTs. This can be a very important, significant way of reducing teasing, bullying, and even in extreme cases, violence.
Yes and no. Each grade is so different in what you're learning and what their bodies are going through, and when we get to baby making, like in 8th, 9th grade, whenever that is, then you can bring on the topic of, yeah, and there are some guys who, just can't do stuff with women.
So in that instance, to what extent do you think LGBTQ topics should be taught then? Does it involve just sex education, talking about historical issues?
Leave the sexuality stuff to 8th, 9th grade. There's no need for elementary schools and 5th graders and 4th graders to be given prompts like, oh, what's your pronoun?
I think if it's taught, at a young age, people will be more likely to express themselves.
Definitely something that should be in history class because a lot has changed and progressed.
Yeah, teaching LGBT+ history. Famous LGBTs like the Russian composer Peter Tchaikovsky, the great mathematician and computer code breaker Alan Turing. These are people that we should all know about, and we should know the fact that they were LGBT or T.
How about like sex education? Should kids be taught that at a young age?
Parents can't stop their kids from doing what they want to do. At the end of the day, don't you want your kids to be safe if they are going to be doing those things?
There's always going to be guidelines, but I think those guidelines need to be written with a public health view, not necessarily just in terms of what the current political climate might be.
We're going to make sure that parents are able to send their kid to kindergarten without having some of this stuff injected into their school curriculum.
Because on one extreme, there's legislation in Florida banning any mention of gay, and on the other, encouraging drag story hours, and so no pun intended, there's a wide spectrum of opinions. But regardless of opinion, there's been undeniable progress over the years. And so in such a polarized topic, it was going to be harder than ever to find the nuance. At the same time, is this even a real issue, or are we just making a problem out of nothing? I guess we gon' see. In religious and a lot of conservative communities, I think there's probably a lot of resistance to having this being taught in schools. How can schools navigate their sensitivities while also promoting inclusivity?
It's not the job of any school to promote any sexuality or gender identity. The purpose is to give young kids the facts, to have happy, healthy sexual and emotional lives.
I do believe in separation of church and state, and public education is a public good.
Do you think parents should have like a right to have their kid be opt-out in education like that?
That's kind of a slippery slope when you start getting into allowing parents to opt out of each and every topic. Part of learning, right? You're not just trying to exclude topics that you're not happy about.
It's all or nothing. Either you say no and you teach your kid about sex, or you're going to let the school teach your kid about sex and let it be known that there are some people out there who just happen to be with same sex.
People may not like the fact that their kids are LGBT or T, but I'm sure they wouldn't want them to get HIV. We need to give that information really loud and clear to all kids, whatever their gender gender identity. Love and relationships are two of the most important things in most people's lives.
Would you say that not talking about LGBTQ topics can lead to further discrimination and hinder progress as a society?
Naturally, as you live your life and as you age and mature, you learn about this stuff in the real world. It's like the most mainstream ever thing right now. People are getting it kind of, in a way, like forced down their throats every day in every aspect of society.
There's a difference between knowledge or awareness around a topic and also pushing, people to operate in certain dynamics. Let's say, as an example, you go to a classroom and they teach you that you as an individual have 50 genders, right? Versus teaching someone that there was a one point in time in history where people thought that way. But I don't think that we should be explaining certain concepts like this that just don't align with biology,
Do you think at this point LGBTQ has as many rights as, let's say, straight people?
I think more. Even on like public companies now, they're required to have diversity as far as sexuality goes on the board. And companies are probably more likely to hire someone who identifies as not straight or not the norm. And so I think that it's pretty pushed and celebrated.
If I had to push back on that though, I've also read statistics that say that whenever employers see, let's say, like a they them pronoun on a resume, they actually are less likely to get hired.
I think it might be fears that they're going to be super difficult to deal with as people.
But wouldn't that in that instance kind of contradict that they have more rights? Or
maybe you're right, yeah.
And so it's clear that generalizing an entire group with diverse identities and representations is damn near impossible. So I wonder if focusing on the individuals would change opinion. Whenever, viewers see this, they're gonna be like, wow, I thought, all the gay people got along with the trans and the queers. Just how, wow, you must be Asian, so you must love all the other Asians.
It's frustrating because I grew up being told, oh, Amir, you're black and you're gay, so you probably have to be like this, expect to vote a certain way. The most free person, I would say, in this country, culturally, is white people. You got white people that are skateboarding, you got white women outside hiking, you got white people doing everything. But for black people, you have a black man hiking, why are you doing white people shit? We're the first to want all this diversity and all this equality, but then the first to shun someone for actually stepping out of the line and doing something different. Same in the gay community. We preach all this diversity and love, tolerance, acceptance, but we're the first to cancel somebody for having a different viewpoint. You want diversity of everything else except diversity of thought.
Do you think there should be a separate curriculum for LG and B and T?
When it comes to the TQ plus stuff, I say leave it to psychology. Gay, straight, and bi, like it's literally just sex. The TQ plus, the endless gender identities, how we're describing ourselves, it's all unnecessary. After gay marriage, a lot of the gays were fine. We were chilling. Everything trans and all these different genders, they have nothing to do with gay people. If anything, gay relations are getting worse.
But when some teachers refuse to even cover these topics, can inclusivity even be achieved? A study suggests that only 57% of teachers across the country wish to discuss LGBTQ issues with their students. But people are trying to change that.
The organization History Unerased says its mission is to make LGBT topics a part of the U.S. mainstream curriculum.
History Unerased is a program that funds LGBTQ education in K-12 schools, supporting teacher training and providing resources.
It provided us with curriculum materials that actually give kids opportunities to grapple with primary sources of actual events that occurred that affect this community.
So whether it was teaching students about iconic activists like Sylvia Rivera and Bayard Rustin, the goal was to make sure that history wasn't forgotten. But of course, not everyone is happy.
We don't want our children forced to be taught things that go against what we believe as Christians.
Many parents across the country oppose the teaching of sexual orientation and gender identity to their kids. And parents are beginning to oppose it to a point where a recent outbreak between Antifa and religious Middle Eastern parents broke out.
Do not assume that everyone's boundaries are the same.
And what's more, it's not just the parents. In 2021, Tennessee passed a law requiring schools to give parents a 30-day notice before teaching LGBTQ, giving parents the right to review and opt out on behalf of their children. And it's impacting what's being shown to kids. In 2021, the American Library Association counted 729 challenges to library, school, and university materials, and one book in particular that was deemed the most inappropriate.
The book is called Gender Queer. It's a memoir of the author's journey of self-identity.
Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe was banned because of its LGBTQ content and use of sexually explicit images.
Graphic illustrations, full nudity.
So it's clear that both sides have opinions on what the best approach is, but is this leading to pushing political agendas instead of what's best for the kids? And what I realize is that when it comes to this topic, are we even asking the right people? And so who better to ask than someone who's been in the trenches for the past 60 years? If you don't mind me asking, are you a gay individual yourself? Did you know from like a young age?
Even though I came out from a very, very devoutly evangelical Pentecostal family where homosexuality was a terrible, terrible sin, I just had a very simple coming out. I just thought the Bible is wrong. I love this man. He loves me. We're happy. We're not harming anybody else. This is beautiful. I never had any guilt or shame. I just accepted it. I just thought, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and the eating was very delicious.
Do you think people are born LGBTQ plus, or do you think it's the environment that leads them to be LGBTQ plus?
Well, the evidence is pretty clear that probably about 50% of sexual orientation is determined by our genetic inheritance, and another very substantial proportion is determined by hormonal influences in the womb.
But if both sides are basing their arguments on whether preferences can be influenced or not, it seems to be a central point. Because even though some studies suggest that there's no specific gay gene, they have found that genes can account for 8 to 25% of the reasons behind people having preferences.
There are many, many genetic traits that contribute to sexual orientation.
Regardless, it's clear that sexuality is complex and biology isn't the only factor. So it raises the question, how big of a role does the environment play then? There's been a couple statistics indicating that a lot of Gen Z or the youth are identifying more with LGBTQ and that it's been on the rise. Do you think this has been a result of a lot more of an environment of acceptance towards those identities? Or do you think it's been more of a kind of like a push that has created an identity crisis among the youth?
I think it's probably like a social contagion to some degree. If you push a certain ideology or sexuality super hard and say that it's like very positive, kids are very influenced, and I think that they will tend to like be pushed into that direction.
I think a lot of it now has to do with acceptance. Because I mean, I'm looking back at myself. If I grew up now and I'm seeing how normal it is to be gay, and that's what all of this is, I probably would have just been like, oh, more people identifying as gay, it makes sense because they're just accepting that part of themselves.
When society kind of doesn't discriminate as much or doesn't have such a negative stigma attached to something, then people are more free to be who they are. You do you.
I think we talk about it more. That may be the reason why it seems like there's more of that.
When I was growing up, the overwhelming pressure from everybody was to be straight. Yet here I am, I'm gay. Public advocacy or public depictions of sexuality can't make someone LGBT if they're not already that way inclined.
People are longing for identity, and people look for ways to put themselves into a box even though they don't really want to be. And when people get social fame, when people get attention, that's going to attract people that are lost, and kids are lost.
So now people are, I guess, being pushed even if there is question to one way or the other.
If my son came to me and he was like, hey, I think I'm gay, I'm like, that's totally fine that you believe that, and let's figure out if this is actually true, versus just immediately saying, congratulations, I'm glad that the things that I thought when I was super young, I don't think nowadays anymore. If I would have been held to the things I thought when I was 12 years old, that would not have been good,
So you don't need me to state the obvious, but almost everyone can agree that we've had significant changes in our thinking, our world, and who we are since our childhood. But as society becomes more accepting, has this debate of what's appropriate by age kept up with the changes? So I think a lot of the controversy too kind of related with this has been around drag queens, whether it be drag story hour or kids being allowed to attend drag brunch, where there's been some maybe even video footage of pretty sexually explicit acts being performed at that. Do you think kids should be allowed in these types of environments?
I think it's weird.
I mean, there is a line that should not be crossed, obviously, and I don't think kids should necessarily be exposed to that per se, but there are worse places for people to be than a drag show.
At the end of the day, you have to let kids kind of learn and experience and grow for themselves and just kind of guide them along the way.
Would you take your kids to a strip club? Your job and your income comes from you stripping off your clothes at night in front of gay men. Leave the kids out of it. There's no need for you to be around kids at all.
The drag story times have been very effective at engaging more young people in reading. A stripper is something completely different. It's just been exaggerated, sensationalized, and so on by homophobes and right-wing critics.
It bugs me so much that people are really advocating and fighting for this and saying, oh my gosh, the LGBTQ community is under attack. No, we're not. You just have some weirdos that are trying to twerk and dance in front of children.
And so could it be said that this is all just an exaggeration? Because even if there are individuals like Clinton Monroe, Ellis Gilmore, who participated in drag queen story hours and then was arrested for public indecency, are we only looking at the extreme cases from both sides to form a perception of an issue, even if there isn't one? And after asking various questions to gather various opinions, I had one final question to get to the root of the issue. So I can focus on what really matters. I needed the tools to make my life easier. And that's exactly why I use Exter, known for inventing the first trackable wallet to help me with my mission to explore the unfamiliar. The slim design fits 12 cards in cash, while built-in RFID blocking keeps my information secure. Someone who's actually had my wallet stolen while traveling, their solar power tracker also helps track your belongings and receive separation alerts from your phone. And so thanks to our sponsor Exter, and use my promo code GEN or shop.exter.com/GEN to enjoy 25% off your next order until November 4th. And so I wanted to ask the question, is this whole topic just simply being blown out of proportion? Doing these interviews too, it made me think, do you think this is actually really a big issue? Or do you think this is being overblown by, let's say, both sides?
I don't think it's being overblown. This is a topic that most definitely needs to be talked about.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's one of those things where you would think overnight this became the single biggest topic in the history of America. You go through life and it's just, I just don't think this is that big of a deal. Like a lot of things in the press, they make it a big deal. So whether it's certain groups or whether it's the media, I think they have just pushed this to a point where it's just kind of absurd.
I think it has been blown out of all proportion, and it's very clear that right-wing pundits are using this issue as a culture war.
I do think it's going to become a bigger problem as time goes on, because the divide is going to cause a lot of problems, and it's actually going to cause people to go both these ways.
On one end, yes, it is very small scale. It's happening in various cities and it's being called out and blown up. But on the flip side, we don't know how far it's going to go. Stop the train where it's at.
A lot of people might also say, for example, this might be a first world problem. What would you say to that statement?
I mean, there are larger issues at hand on a global scale, but that doesn't mean that we need to diminish the issues that are, in our backyard as well.
Yeah, because all problems are also perspective as well. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You study history, you study the Roman Empire, they built it up into this huge empire, then they started falling apart when they started just dealing with issues like this. Both sides are getting ridiculously worked up over a topic that's just, if you were not on social media, you just wouldn't even know this is an issue.
But as always, nothing in life is ever accomplished through indifference. And that's exactly why reasonable awareness is so important to inspire action, even if it's just to acknowledge the progress made. What do you think are some of the struggles that LGBTQ+ still face today?
Well, we know from the research that the level of violence is much higher than average. The abusive practice of so-called conversion therapy, the attempt to change someone's sexuality, religious communities and minority ethnic communities, it's much more difficult for LGBT+ people to come out and find acceptance. So yeah, there are still battles to fight and win.
Because whether you're gay or straight or trans, the struggle of discovering and accepting your identity is something that we can all share. And when we can start seeing each other as humans living on the same spinning rock, we can move beyond the extreme opinions and recognize that many of these extremes are intentionally being manufactured to piss you off. Because to keep balance in society, we need those that are advocating for progress, as well as those who are keeping a check on uncontrolled change. And it's only by challenging your own perceptions that you can start thinking for yourself and not just going along with whatever side you're on. And that's exactly the mission, to explore the unfamiliar. Thanks to our sponsor Exter, and subscribe if you want to see more content where I turn street interviews into investigative journalism. And I also recently started streaming, so subscribe to my second channel, Gen Plus, to see all the highlights and more. And if YouTube has a nuance, then you'll like this video too.